I am Josh Autumn. I'm here with Luke Temple. We're here on campus in PAC 115 in what we call uh, Panorama Studios, and this is the first week of our Panorama Creative Music Summit. We're super happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the long journey
Of course.
over the grapevine. So yeah, I kind of became aware of you and your music inching toward 20 years ago, if I can believe that, like early 2000s, mid 2000s. And it's been super inspiring and interesting to revisit that work that I heard originally this past week, and then also kind of combing through your catalog of work under your own name, Art Feynman, and Here We Go Magic stuff. And it's just been like, I think a huge thing that hit me is how prolific you've been, if I want to use like a 20-year sort of framework. Like you have so many records and so many sounds you've developed, and it's always struck me as so like you have such a singular sort of sonic world you've put together, and I was just, I don't know, re-struck by it. I think I've always been really taken with your stuff, but I was especially kind of struck by that. And then I also, you sort of came back into my world because I signed up for that course that you did with School of Song, which was like really, really inspiring. And I was telling you before that I'd taken a break on and off from writing music myself, but just having assignments is like the most powerful thing, you know? It like gets you doing something. So I was really inspired with that. I guess I wanted to just ask you some questions today, starting with maybe what comes to mind about what is currently exciting you the most about making music. Whether it's stuff you're listening to or maybe what you're just drawn to these days.
Well, right now I'm in the middle of making an album, so I'm like not listening to much. I'm just sort of listening to the music I'm making. But we had a couple. So I have my project Art Feynman. Typically has been a very solo affair, like just more solo than anything I've done. All the records are done on 4-track at home, like recorded to cassette.
And strictly you playing all the things,
Yeah,
for the most part, yeah.
And I tried to adhere to rules with Art Feynman. I slowly started breaking them. In initially attempting to move to LA, I wanted to like spend some time in LA. I just moved there in June. I wanted to spend some time there before to sort of, and kind of be working on something and be involved in the music community, to just see what it feels like. So I put together a band, and we booked this residency in April at this place, Permanent Records Roadhouse. And it was like, ended up being like a big 7-piece band with like 2 drummers and all this stuff. And it was amazing, and it took on a life of its own. So then after that, I was like, oh man, the next Art Feynman record's got to be with this band. So I, broke one of my rules there, but it's for the better. And so, kind of more to your question, I think like the inspiration for that, just from a sonic perspective for me, is like there was this studio in the Bahamas called Compass Point that Remain in Light was recorded there. Sly and Robbie were, from Black Uhuru, like in the sort of like ubiquitous rhythm section for a lot of reggae stuff, were like house musicians there. And this woman, Lizzie Merceau, who's this French kind of like post-punk funk thing. It's like Grace Jones, early Robert Palmer. It has this kind of icy 80s kind of bright mids sound to it. And it was in a time when it was just after punk, and then the punks were sort of like looking towards maybe like African music and reggae and stuff, and kind of cross-pollinating those two things together. And the Art Feynman music has kind of gone there a little bit in the past, and certainly with this band, with like two drummers, but one guy plays more percussion, and it's very polyrhythmic, and it kind of has like a Talking Heads vibe. So that was like the sort of watermark that we were going for sonically, and so I was like listening to that stuff a bit, but now I'm just working on that record.
Is the Compass Point thing like, I've heard some records that I'm sure recorded there, but does it feel like when you look into that world, does it feel like a Blue Note situation in a way where the records that came out of Compass Point, were a lot of them recorded by the same person?
Yeah.
Is there a lot of that house engineer stuff? And
yeah, it's was Rudy Van Gelder Blue Note?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it has a sound.
It has a sound, yeah.
I don't know how technical you want to get.
Let's get technical. Yeah.
Well, there's I mean, nobody knows exactly for sure, but like how often people would use these things. But there's these outboard boxes they're like these Dolby 60As. Do you know those things? Mm-hmm. They were like originally made to get rid of tape hiss going in, but then they'd have to make up for the high end that they lost by adding this kind of like digital high end.
Okay.
And it's basically like the sound of like
those records.
Yeah, like the second half of the 70s and most of the 80s is that kind of sound.
Yeah.
It's this there's this like hyper mid kind of high mids. It's not like too much high end. It's just a certain kind of mid-range presence that I've noticed that over time has been rolled off, and then it became all about the subs, you know.
Right.
And everything now, I think with the kind of the advent of like just accessibility to home recording, music is becoming more and more headphone based and sort of personal, and people don't tend to sing out as much, you know. Sounds are more like about like sort of in your ear, low sub bass that maybe would be accommodating for like an EDM festival or something like that.
It's extreme like that, right? You've got low subs, but then you have like, what's it called, AMSR or whatever, right? Where it's like the whispery, like super soft.
Right.
That extreme thing.
Yeah, and like if you listen, like when I was listening to those records, like the Grace Jones or like Lizzie Merceau or Talking Heads or whatever, you just realize how bright it is in contrast, but not bright in a bad way, like but in a way that I historically would never let myself do, and nobody I've worked with would kind of let themselves go there.
Go to that band on the frequency spectrum.
Yeah, like really just like
almost harsh, right? In a way.
Yeah, like just ballsy with with the mids, like hi-hats, just really in your face. I mean, if you think of also like Tattoo You, the Stones record was recorded there. If you think of like Charlie Watts' drum sound from around like the Stones disco era.
Yeah. I was going to ask about disco too. Like disco records, I guess is the disco wave crashing when those Compass Point records are made? I imagine like is it sort of in the wake of that?
I think so. I mean,
it feels like kind of like it's like in the realm of dance music still, and sort of this hyped up late 70s, 80s tempo and energy. But the Compass Point thing sounds like a different approach to dance music, right?
Well, probably, you know, I am, I'm kind of like, don't know my dance music.
I'm not a dance music historian, yeah.
But I think, you know, generally speaking, it was like disco first, 70s was disco.
Yeah.
And then disco moved into like house, I want to say. And then like house moved into techno. Mm-hmm. And I think generally speaking, it's like, I mean, they all still exist. They've always all still, but the time of it being a novel new thing, like disco was 70s. I think house was kind of 80s.
Yeah.
Techno 90s. Now it's all just like whatever, a grab bag. And I think disco is probably like as the popular music of the time was kind of over. Probably it was like punk rock sort of attempted to demolish that. But it's funny that that a lot of those artists then ended up
the punks
going back,
started dancing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a little bit tangential, but I mean, like the Clash, for instance, with like a lot of the English sort of working class kids were sort of like butted up against like West Indian people, and so and they sort of shared a common struggle that sort of unified them. So that reggae and that punk cross pollination makes a lot of sense, So yeah, I mean, I think it's like there's like a in a lot of that kind of like West African music and reggae, there's like even though it's really mellow, there's teeth to it.
Yeah.
And I think that relates to the punk mentality. It's like a safe zone to go to make it danceable, but not like get too light in the loafers or something. You know what I mean?
I like that you're bringing up like specific gear, or even, I mean, sometimes it's fun to think about like how we resonate with music. Like you could just identify spots on the frequency spectrum to essentially say like this, among other things, among all the socio-cultural conditions and the economic conditions and the conditions of people's race and et cetera, like you can also just say like the hi-hats are pushed really hard in 5K or 1K or whatever you're talking about, and that actually is sort of the sound, right? And so it's interesting to like hear you talk about that you're drawn toward this production style or something, but the fact that you just like said that it has teeth to it, right? Like there's something about how significant that can be, like almost just emphasizing, not to reduce all that other stuff I just said, but like by literally shining a bright light on a part of the frequency spectrum that's historically not shined on in polished major label disco, for instance, which has way higher sparkly high end, and like reduced, probably cut that frequency, that compass point frequency or whatever. Like there can be just as much of a technical reason as like a socioeconomic reason, cultural reason, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's interesting to look at record production this way.
Yeah.
I'm curious, we were talking earlier, and this kind of connects to what we were just talking about, but we were talking earlier about sort of place and how place can affect you creatively, right? Like either whether it's where you live or maybe where you've spent time or where you've toured or something like that. Can you speak on your recent experience, sort of changing up your location and how that's affected your creative activity? I know you're brand new down to LA right now, so it's not that long, but whatever comes to mind.
I came down there sort of running. I had already had a bunch of projects like in mind to start, so I got going right away. And so, I don't know, that was that steam was building before I got there. But as I'm there, I'm starting to get a sense of like how starting to get a sense of what it feels like to be inspired by that place, and it's like I think that I don't know. I've never lived in LA before. I know LA's always been a hub, like an urban cultural hub. I think right now it might be going through kind of a special time, creatively speaking. And I don't know if it's just maybe what a lot of places are experiencing, coming out of sort of pretend out of the pandemic. And a lot of that just sort of gestation period during the pandemic is now sort of like being born. Or it might have something to do with just LA at the moment. I mean, I remember like New York had that in like when I was there, and between like 2008 and 2013 was like this very
I was going to bring that up.
Thing.
Yeah, and there's a sound of that place at that time.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that feels, I mean, again, I just moved there, so of course it's all new to me. But I kind of have a sense that LA is going through a specifically fertile moment right now, and in particular, it's people are not only creatively speaking, it's very creative, but like formally speaking, people are like operating on a very high level there that's surprising to me.
Huh.
Like people can play their asses off, like all over the place. There's like virtuosity
everywhere,
just spilling out all over the place. I don't know if it's like, and a lot of these people are young, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's like, I was living in the woods for the last 7 years. There's people that are kind of just starting to play out, and they're like 21, 20. So, maybe before the pandemic they were 18, 17, so they weren't really coming out. So now, and they've been sitting
2 years
home with some YouTube tutorial, or I don't know what they've been, learning, like Charlie Parker solos or something, and then all of a sudden they come out, and it's just fully formed.
Yeah.
Virtuosity,
Yeah.
So it's humbling a little bit, but it's also really inspiring, and it's gotten me. I'm self-taught, and I've only learned sort of the loose theory that I know is just by virtue of playing with musicians that are much better than me for a long time, and I've just picked up things along the way. But outside of just writing songs, which I do consistently, I've never had a practice schedule. But now I'm like in LA, and I'm like,
I better get
I'm
my
gonna start practicing.
Yeah. I'm struck by the connection too. You brought up the New York, like mid late 2000s to early 2010 time, right? Whatever, 2008 to 2013 or something like that. And I think a lot about like music education because I do it for a living, but I also think about this idea that like most of our heroes from generations gone by, like nobody went to music school, right? You could sort of maybe make that broad sweep of pop music in general. Music school did not equal some kind of career in music. It often would just equal a career teaching or something like that. But I think these days it seems like a lot of people, including aren't a lot of your peers from your sort of New York era, were those a lot of trained musicians?
Some, yeah.
In a way, coming from some kind of musical training more formal than yours?
Yeah, I mean, yes. It's less obvious in some ways, though. Like, I think
you think people were trying to hide the shred more back then?
Probably there was probably
or mask it or something.
There's probably still some of that kind of punk kind of ethos that is there, where it's like not too cool to be too flashy with your playing. It's like get the message across, don't make it too verbose or like floral with just.
But then the LA juxtaposition.
Well, it's very
argue.
It's very ornamental, right?
Yeah.
It's like you think of someone like I mean the epitome of this kind of thing is someone like Lewis Cole or like or like Thundercat kind of, or this sort of there's like this. And it's not really that's not the kind of music that I'll ever play. I appreciate it, and it's but it's not something I need to necessarily learn how to do.
Yeah.
But it's like there are people all over the place that can just kind of play on that level, it seems like, and they might not even be making that kind of music, which I'm just like kind of it's sort of astounding to me. And I don't know if it's just whatever circle I've kind of found myself into, and one person tells me about a show, and I meet someone at that show, and they tell me about a show, and so I'm just happen to be kind of in this network of like these like masterful musicians everywhere. But it's really seems like what's going on down there, and it's inspiring to me because it's making me feel like non-complacent. Like I've been living. I was the only songwriter, like working musician,
Within like a radius, like a
yeah, of within like a 20-mile radius or something, where I was living in Marin, like everyone kind of did it for fun, the musicians there. But now I'm with people down in LA that are like living and breathing this again. And it almost feels even more so than. There's something about New York where it's like people don't want to wear. They don't want to wear their effort on their sleeve. They don't want to wear their drive on their sleeve. They don't want to. Yeah. They don't want to wear their influences on their sleeve. New York is very much about world building. Like I create my own universe and and it pull as much from outsider influences as they do from inside stuff. And like it's like.
And you're from that area, right? Or like generally the East Coast.
I lived in New York for 16 years.
Ethos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to think also when we use the term like punk or punk rock too, like you could argue that the virtuosity and florality on display in LA is also a version of punk rock, right? Like it's just as punk to get on stage and shred out and expand, like do the most you can ever do and wear every single influence on your sleeve and make it bare, lay it bare. It almost feels just as or possibly more punk rock than stripping it all down, hiding your influences, and like being as, closed off to society as possible or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the lid being ripped off of all of that, like unnecessary considerations in regards to do's and don'ts of style and fashion and music and all that stuff. I mean, that's it. I think those limitations helped to innovate to some degree, but it would be naive for us to continue in that direction because, like the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
It's like it's all just up for grabs.
Yep.
And you might as well try to get the most, try to get the most that you can out of all of the, without all the information we have at our disposal, without giving yourself like overwhelming yourself. You can only do so much. I wonder, like I'm old, we're about the same age, and I wonder if the younger kids just have like a wider aptitude or something for like a broad band of influences or something, or it's harder to like I'll never be a like a virtuoso player, like that's just not what but I wonder even if when I was that age, it would have been much more difficult for me to just find a way in to be able to do that. Right. Outside of just like paying a bunch of money and going to Berkeley, or
you would have, and then you would have come out of that training wired to do whatever that virtuosity would be, like in a very specific category.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Do you? I wonder about, like, you're talking about people sort of wearing influences on sleeves versus guarding and building a world or whatever. This idea. And I've been struck lately when I hear conversations with creative people about the last 2.5 years or whatever. Did you find yourself in terms of like creativity? I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about like sort of revisiting the roots of what they do to get in touch. You know what I mean? Like to reach back to, why do I even play music? What is my favorite stuff? What am I doing? I heard somebody say yesterday, maybe it was Questlove or something like this on some interview, like about just trying to become 8 or 9 years old again, like this feeling of sort of distilling all of this. The noise got all distilled for us because it like that naturally happened. And I feel like I've spoken to a lot of people who, I don't know, like I don't want to call it nostalgia because that sounds a little too cheap or something, but I wonder what your relationship is with some of your formative influences and how those sort of formative or maybe past obsessions, right? So the compass point thing might be a thing for you right now, right? But 10 years ago, you might have had a very different obsession or focus or whatever. When you kind of look back, whether it's to like the the 8 or 9-year-old self or whatever, or the artist 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago when we sort of met, do you feel like what's your relationship with that stuff? Do you feel like it's gone and here we are now, or do you feel like you want to be reaching back and pulling on that, or is that timeline even worth thinking about?
I think that, well, just for like, as you were saying that, I was thinking about it, and I think that, like, generally speaking, there's still some elusive thing that I hold as like a watermark for like creating like it's an intangible, it's a, I don't even know how to say it, just some kind of deep intentionality that makes something feel whole and complete and real and honest. And I think that like an intent or something. And I think that like when I was young, I was attracted to stuff. Like the first music I was into was like punk rock, but via like skateboarding videos and stuff. So like, you know, from like Southern California. So it was like Fire Hose and like the Minutemen and, you know, and then like Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, all that stuff. And like I think that and I knew back then, I knew that even in my very early like nascent period of like music understanding, I had a sense that they were like intentionally bad, but they were doing that intentionally to get a point across. It was like a, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
It's like a fuck you or something, you know, which like perked my interest on a very primal level. And then like fast forward through like, you know, listening to Coltrane, for instance, you know, like later, it's like he understood form. He was a master of his craft and his form, but needed to get to a point, kind of like what you were saying with Questlove. He needed to get to a point where he could just throw it all away. It was necessary for him to do that in order to get his actual point across.
Right.
So there's a there's a connection there, and I feel like I still hold this sense of like, even regardless, you know, all that we were talking about like being inspired by virtuosity and wanting to practice and stuff, like the technique is one thing, but the technique hopefully will make it so when you get that elusive feeling, that intangible globular emotion that you want to formalize somehow, you'll have the tools to be able to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And that, like, my understanding of like technique has changed, but it's always just been that kind of thing. Like, what is it? And I was always into bands because I didn't understand what was it about them that gave them that thing. And it was never about anything specific or literal. It was never about the politics. It was never about the way they dressed. It wasn't about those things. It was about all of the whole thing. Like, it was like, it was about it, but not about any of it. And it was just about the complete thing and then the feeling it gave me.
That visceral, yeah.
And I still sometimes, like in my own music, sometimes I get that, very occasionally. Yeah. And I don't even know how I did it. And I don't even know what it is in my own stuff. It's perpetually elusive. But that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Right. If you can bottle that, what's the point? Or like, you'd stop or whatever.
Yeah, because and then it wouldn't be. I mean, it's this. It's like Uncharted Territory. So, if we don't understand, it's like probing the unconscious or something. It's unconscious. You can't know about it.
Right.
Like you can't actually. You can only experience parts of the unconscious that become conscious.
Yep.
So it's like you can't. That's just part of the equation.
Yeah. That's really well put. I really like that idea. Yeah, that makes me think about a lot of things at once. So I guess like to sort of tie that in, and maybe you sort of addressed this, but when you think of your past work, like you just mentioned that you've touched it here and there, right? Like rarely, maybe. So like potentially, if you were to look at your whole entire discography or catalog, you might be like, that one felt close. Am I getting that right? Sort of.
Yeah.
What about all the times? Do you almost look at it sort of like these are all, in a sense, like an attempt to push toward that? And like maybe if there's that song where you're like, yeah, forget that song or something like that. Do you look at what's your relationship with sort of your work as it has like developed over time? Because I was so struck by how prolific you are. Like I have certain artists in my head as prolific musicians, and for some reason, whenever I thought of your music, I wasn't like, oh yeah, he has like tons of. But you have so many projects at this point with this unifying sonic sort of signature that's really that you could easily tie, no matter what your production sort of aesthetic is. I still can hear you and sort of that deeper thing. But I'm curious about that. I don't know what that sort of idea triggers for you, like how you feel about your past work, the stuff you resonate with and the stuff you don't, or something like that.
I don't know. There's maybe like 3 or 4 songs out there that I can listen to and not want to turn off.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a couple. They're usually like the beginning of some project, like the birthing of something is accompanied with a little gift.
Yeah.
Some divine providence or something happens, and like a song will come out really easily and naturally, and then I'll try to like grab onto that feeling over and over again, but I'll never quite get it.
Got it.
But that's so they're dotted along the path there,
So it can feel like those dots are like that's the North Star thing, and maybe the surrounding collection of songs felt like they were also sort of. Now, do you feel like you know any musicians or visual artists, because I know that's in your world too, that have the opposite relationship with their work? Not that they're sitting around listening to their own music all day, but that there's kind of this like, you know what I mean? Like this deeply like whatever proud sense of,
I think
a person's work or discography or something like that.
Personally speaking, like personal close friends, I can't think of anyone, but I remember like watching some video with Iggy Pop and him like listening to his own stuff on a little cassette deck, and he was just like, yeah, that's bitchin', isn't
just
it?
jazzed on it. Yeah.
He was so into it. And Lou Reed, who's like, he's like my Dylan, I think, really. Like, he's like my top guy.
Yeah.
I think he kind of was like that, That was part of that time, that sort of strong and wrong.
Yeah.
They're boomers, like a kind of there's a naivete built into the arrogance.
Yes.
It was like part of it.
Yes.
And it was like it was all so novel and so new that like you couldn't really compare it to anything anymore.
Yes.
It was like new to sing and not be able to sing, for instance.
Well, and it ties into what we were talking about with virtuosity, right? Like those two artists in particular, it's not like they're like carrying the tune perfectly or hitting the rhythm exact or whatever, but there's almost this leaning into the strong is wrong thing. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they I feel like both of those guys. But I mean, I just heard sometimes I think that people people will say to me, like you're never going to be happy with what you do. That's just, you just got to accept that. And I certainly was like not happy with a lot of my earlier stuff. I was as I was coming along, and I think to myself, no, I think I am gonna get better, and I'm going to start enjoying my stuff more, and that has been the case actually.
Yeah.
I have been feeling more satisfied, and because I feel like as time goes on, I remember to pay attention to knowing when I've hit that thing, and that it's not about pleasing anybody else. It's not about trying to be cool or trying to like be innovative or anything like that. And so getting out of letting my brain, like not having my brain get in the way, you know, with conceptual concerns. I think that's been like a stripping away thing for me over the years. Just to be like, the music, the power is like in my hands, it's in my body, it's in my mouth. That's it. Like, not to get too vague, but there's nowhere else it's gonna live. It's right. It's like on some level there's practice and work, but then in the performance of it, it's the path of least resistance, and it's got to be working with your strengths, accepting your fallibility, you know, and finding where you like what you have to say specifically, and the way that you naturally can say. Like I have a relationship to rhythm. I found like I was always trying to work on the things that I was deficient at, and sort of not really paying attention necessarily to like the things that came more naturally to me.
Yeah.
But I realized that there needs to be, you know, you do need to work on the things that you need to work on, but you also need to support yourself in the ways
right.
that are natural, and
don't take those for granted and just focus on the shit you're not good at or whatever, right? But like lean into that.
And nurture that. You know, for me, it's like like phrasing and rhythm is something that I feel like I have a pretty natural ability for, but I was always just like stressing about my pitch.
Yeah.
And just stressing on you know, wanting to be able to sing like Aretha Franklin or something, which I just will never be able to do that. Like I need to just come to terms with my limitations, you know?
Yeah.
And like, and there's freedom in that. And, you know, it's also why it's like why I appreciate someone like Lou Reed being so confident in himself. Like, cause it's, you know, he doesn't sing close to that, and he's one of my favorite people to listen to sing, you know?
So there's a lesson in there.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your relationship as sort of like and since you do so much solo, and since you've made so many records sort of like alone or hatched so many ideas alone, do you feel like your approach has also, I don't want to say like softened, but maybe gotten more generous? Like for instance, when you're rehearsing with this new band, a 7-person band, you're leading a band, and like, were you, Here We Go Magic was that also leader oriented, or was that a bit more of a democracy here and there? It depended.
Not without a struggle in both directions. I mean,
but do you feel like I guess the question is now in the very, you know, you're suddenly collaborating with a bunch of people again, doing a rehearsal, doing a recording session. Have you noticed, are you a different kind of communicator, band leader? Like what's the spirit behind it these days compared to your younger self?
I think I'm getting better at it. I mean, I definitely like have my impatient moments.
Sure.
You know? I'm so used to doing stuff on my own that I have like a certain way that I feel like I you know, want it to go, and sometimes I can be sort of nearsighted with the people like that I'm working with, and you know, I'm making this record with this band, and I've sort of had it in my mind I wanted to do something, so like, and I would be like maybe trying to control it to go in this direction, and then give it a couple days, go back, listen, and I'm like, oh, his idea was better.
Yeah.
So that's good to be even in hindsight, and to be able to come back to it and then be like, you know what, I think I'm gonna I should stay out of your way here.
Huh.
That's I think I'm getting better at that. And then in general, I think I am just more relaxed because I also realize that that better results come from being more relaxed, and also with bands being more of a curatorial, like the way Miles would put bands together.
Yeah.
Where it's just
he's not telling people what to play.
Well, you give him the most crazy cluster of notes and be like, this is what we're dealing with, for Bitches Brew or something, just
Yeah.
And they just have to then everyone would just be themselves.
Yes. Right.
I think that's what I'm trying to get out of my bands. I want them to just do them. If it feels like people are timid or not really coming out, then I'll sort of step up and maybe offer a suggestion. Mm-hmm. But it's a fine line. I need to be careful with that too, because that can set a train rolling of people sort of being perpetually kind of
ready for you to chime in and tell them what to do, basically. Right?
Yeah. So you got to give space and be patient, and that's something I'm working on. Patience it's relative. You think it's this is taking forever, but it's maybe you've been sitting there working for 3 hours. Right. And it's sometimes the good stuff takes, months of practice or something. I mean,
Yeah. Does it feel like recording this recent record too, that was probably, I'm assuming, I don't know how much kind of post-production you're doing, but was that fast for you? Was that fast making that record? Or I guess I'm also thinking of a solo record you put out. Was it 2 ago, Hand Through the Cellar Door maybe? That sounded like a live-ish.
That was live, yeah.
Record. Okay, so that was probably kind of quick to make.
That was quick.
So you've made some quick records.
It was 2 days, that
okay.
record. Yeah.
Okay. So you've done the quick record thing for sure. And is this recent one relatively quick? Or are you planning to sort of go back and begin a post-production thing?
I am, yeah. So 3 days, the lion's share of the instrumentation recorded, just all the basics, which is considerable. I mean, it's 2 guitars, 2 synths, 2 drums, bass, some of my lead vocals. So we did a lot in 3 days. We got 10 songs recorded, but now I'm kind of going back, and I wrote a lot of this stuff to facilitate playing live. We needed more material, so I was writing stuff in between our residencies to get material together. And now that I'm sitting with it, I am realizing that some of it could be better, so I'm kind of rewriting some stuff.
Okay.
But the structurally speaking, it's just staying the same, just better lyrics and some different melodies and stuff.
Okay, yeah. And then do you feel like recording in the studio atmosphere versus at home, where you have obviously unlimited time and the money's not the same issue, obviously? Where do you sort of land on that these days? Do you kind of appreciate both for what they are, and you can lean into both of those environments just fine?
Yeah, I think recording with a band, obviously in a studio, is ideal, for sure. I love that, and I just love playing with people. Recording on my own, definitely just prefer doing it on my own. But I think that too much of that, it is at the detriment of probably the end result to some degree, because you can just sit there and obsess over things that aren't important, and you kind of lose the plot. Right. So I have to watch that, and then that's something I'm trying to sort of treat Pro Tools like it's just a tape machine, and just not be getting into playlist pile up, and I'm trying to do one take at a time, and just
That's cool.
So, and I've already noticed I'm maybe overcomplicating some stuff with this Art Feynman record, but then I, kind of be like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I want to hear that melody again. And it's in part probably because I've just been listening to it like for 3 days, and I'm like, this is terrible. This is a terrible melody. So I'll change it, and then I'll come back with fresh ears like a couple days later and be like, that was fine. And I just made it way worse, But that's a result of just sitting at home,
Right. Torturing. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Well, thank you for the conversation. I appreciate it, Luke. I'm really glad you're here this week, and I'm looking forward to your show tonight and some more stuff tomorrow.
Thanks.